There are towns in the American West where the buildings still stand. Doors remain closed. Windows remain broken. And the streets here, no footsteps at all. Once these places were louder than cities back east. Gold flowed through them. Money changed hands daily. Saloons never closed, and the sound of picks and hammers echoed through the night. Then the gold disappeared, and the people followed. Some left in a hurry. Others waited too long, hoping the ground would give them one more chance. Entire communities vanished in weeks, leaving behind homes, shops, safes, and streets that would never be used again. Before we continue, if you're drawn to real treasure stories, lost gold, and the forgotten side of history, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. These stories aren't just about wealth. They're about what happens when it's gone. Now imagine walking into a town where the clocks stopped decades ago. No voices, no movement, only the wind and the feeling that something was left behind. This is the story of the gold rush ghost towns. Cities built on gold and abandoned forever. Gold did not just attract people. It created cities, almost overnight. When a rich strike was reported, word spread faster than any official announcement ever could. A rumor passed through camps, saloons, and trading posts. By the time it reached the nearest town, men were already packing wagons. Within weeks, empty land transformed. Tents appeared first, then wooden shacks, then entire streets. What began as a handful of miners quickly became thousands of people chasing the same promise. Merchants followed close behind. Where miners gathered, money followed. And where money flowed, everything else arrived. Saloons were built before churches, gambling halls before schools, general stores before hospitals. Some towns never even received official names at first. They were known simply by what lay beneath them: a creek, a hill, a claim number scratched into a map. The pace was relentless. Buildings went up without foundations. Streets were laid out without planning. Entire blocks were constructed from cheap lumber, knowing full well they might not last more than a few years or even months. But no one cared, because gold made time feel irrelevant. In the height of a boom, a town could grow from nothing to tens of thousands of people in a single season. Prices soared. Fortunes were made without ever touching a mining tool. A merchant selling supplies often earned more than the miners digging for gold themselves. Life moved fast, too fast to question how long it could last. At night, these towns glowed with activity. Lamps burned late. Music spilled into the streets. Deals were struck over drinks. Arguments turned violent. And gold passed through countless hands, always moving, never staying in one place for long. Yet beneath all of it lay a fragile truth. These cities existed for one reason, and one reason only: gold. And the moment the gold began to disappear, everything else would follow. At first glance, a gold rush town felt alive in a way few places ever had. The streets were crowded from morning until deep into the night. Boots kicked up dust as men moved from claim offices to supply stores, from saloons to gambling halls. The air carried the smell of smoke, sweat, alcohol, and fresh-cut wood. Gold was everywhere, and nowhere safe. Miners arrived with small pouches of dust tied close to their bodies. Others carried nuggets wrapped in cloth or hidden inside boots. Every transaction revolved around weight and trust. Coins were scarce. Gold dust became currency, measured carefully on tiny scales that never left a merchant's sight. Life moved fast. Saloons filled before sunset. Music spilled through open doors. Cards slapped against tables. Laughter turned into shouting, and shouting often ended in fights. Some disputes were settled with fists, others with knives, a few with gunfire that echoed briefly, then disappeared into the noise of the town. There were no real rules. Sheriffs existed in name, but not in strength. Justice depended on who was watching and how many people stood behind you. A man with gold had influence. A man without it had little protection. Yet despite the danger, people stayed. because opportunity felt immediate. A miner could strike it rich in a single day or lose everything just as quickly. A shopkeeper might double his earnings overnight. A gambler could walk out with a fortune or never walk out at all. Families arrived too. Women opened boarding houses. Children ran through streets meant for wagons. Churches and schools were built eventually, often as attempts to give permanence to places that had none. Behind the noise, there was exhaustion. Most miners worked brutal hours. Cold water numbed hands. Claims ran dry faster than expected. For every success story, dozens ended in quiet failure. Men returned to town carrying nothing but fatigue and hoped that tomorrow would be different. Still, the town never slowed, because no one wanted to be the first to believe it might end. Gold rush towns thrived on denial as much as gold. As long as someone was still finding something, anything, the illusion of permanence held. But beneath the laughter and light, a question lingered. What happens when the gold stops coming? At first, no one wanted to admit it. Gold rush towns were built on optimism, and optimism does not disappear easily. A dry claim was dismissed as bad luck. A quiet week was blamed on weather. A miner leaving town was assumed to have struck it rich somewhere else. But slowly, patterns emerged. The richest claims were the first to go. Easy gold, the kind found near the surface or in shallow streams, became harder to find. Miners worked longer hours for smaller returns. Pans that once shimmered with flakes now held mostly sand and gravel. Hope shifted from certainty to rumor. People spoke of new strikes just beyond the hills. A hidden vein farther upstream. A claim no one had worked properly yet. The town leaned on these stories the way it once leaned on gold itself. Merchants noticed the change before anyone else. Fewer customers came through the door. Credit was requested more often. Debts stretched longer than promised. Prices, once absurdly high, began to soften, not because goods were cheaper, but because fewer people could afford them. Saloons stayed open, but the laughter grew forced. Gambling tables still filled, yet winnings circulated among the same small group of people. Gold stopped flowing outward and began pooling in fewer hands. Miners grew restless. Some doubled down, convinced one final effort would turn everything around. Others quietly packed up and left, slipping out of town before dawn to avoid questions they couldn't answer. Families felt the change deeply. Boarding houses emptied room by room. Children were pulled from schools that suddenly struggled to stay open. Churches preached patience and endurance, even as donations declined. The town did not collapse all at once. It thinned. Each departure made the next one easier. Each closed shop made the streets feel wider and quieter. And with every passing week, the truth became harder to ignore. The gold that had created the town was no longer enough to sustain it. There was never a single moment when a gold rush town officially died. No announcement, no final bell, no last day marked on a calendar. Instead, there was a night when something changed. The streets grew quieter than usual. Fewer lamps were lit. Doors closed earlier than they had before. In some towns, it happened after a bad winter. In others, it followed months of decline that finally reached a breaking point. A supply wagon failed to arrive. A mine flooded. A nearby strike drew away the last hopeful miners. That night, people packed what little they had left. Some loaded wagons carefully, planning to leave at first light. Others left in silence, carrying only what they could fit on their backs. The sound of wheels on dirt echoed briefly, then disappeared into the dark. By morning, the town felt different. Shops remained closed. Boarding houses stood empty. Saloons opened their doors to almost no one. A few people stayed behind, unwilling or unable to leave. They waited days, then weeks, hoping someone would return, hoping the gold might come back, hoping the town could still be saved. It never was. Wind moved through empty streets, carrying dust where crowds once stood. Signs creaked on loose hinges. Papers scattered across floors that had once been swept daily. In some places, food remained on tables. Tools lay where they had last been used. Safes stayed locked, not because they were full, but because no one bothered to open them anymore. The silence settled slowly, and once it did, it never truly left. Gold rush towns were not abandoned all at once. They were left behind in pieces. When people realized the town would not recover, they took what they could carry and nothing more. Wagons were already worn. Animals were weak. Roads were long and uncertain. Every item had its place. So many things stayed. Inside houses, furniture remained exactly where it had last been used. Chairs were pushed back from tables. Beds were left unmade. Shelves still held dishes chipped from daily use. In stores, goods sat untouched. Tools hung on walls. Scales used to weigh gold gathered dust. Ledgers lay open to final entries that would never be updated. Names, numbers, debts, all frozen in time. Some buildings held more personal traces. A child's toy left in a corner. A coat hanging by the door. A pair of boots placed neatly beside a bed. These are not things people meant to abandon forever. They were things left behind because there was no room, physically or emotionally, to carry them forward. Safes told their own stories. Many were empty, their contents spent long before the town died. Others were never opened again, not because they were full, but because no one cared enough to try. In a few rare cases, small amounts of gold were found inside years later, forgotten, overlooked, or simply not worth the effort at the time. Outside, the evidence of departure was everywhere. Mining equipment lay, rusting near shafts that were never sealed. Wagons stood half-loaded, as if the owners had stepped away for a moment and never returned. Streets filled slowly with dust, erasing the marks of footsteps and wheels. Nature moved in quietly. Wood cracked and warped. Roofs collapsed. Windows shattered under wind and weather. Weeds grew through floorboards. Animals made homes where families once lived. What remained was not wealth. It was absence. Each abandoned object became a marker of a decision made under pressure, a moment when someone chose uncertainty elsewhere over certainty here. And the town, once built in weeks, began its much slower transformation into something else entirely. A place remembered not for what it had, but for what it lost. Many gold rush towns were abandoned with the belief that people would return. Not immediately, not next month, but someday, when the gold ran out, leaving felt temporary. A pause, a retreat until conditions improved or a new strike reignited hope. Some locked doors. Others left notes for neighbors. A few buried valuables nearby, convinced they would come back for them. Most never did. Distance played a role. Once people left, they scattered across the West. Some found work elsewhere. Others moved on to new rushes, silver, copper land. Time pulled them forward. Returning meant retracing hardship, reopening failure, and revisiting places tied to disappointment. There was also fear. Abandoned towns became dangerous places. Roofs collapsed. Mines flooded or caved in. Wild animals claimed empty buildings. Bandits and drifters passed through, stripping anything of value. What had once felt familiar now felt hostile. And then there was memory. For many, these towns represented broken promises, dreams that never materialized, years of labor that ended quietly without reward. Returning meant confronting that reality, and many chose not to. Even when interest resurfaced decades later, reclamation rarely happened. By then, nature had taken hold. Roads had vanished. Ownership was unclear. Buildings were too far gone to repair. It was easier to build somewhere new than to revive what had already failed. So the town stayed empty, not because they were forgotten, but because they were remembered too well. They became places people spoke about in the past tense, places pointed out on maps, then ignored, places where time did not stop. It simply slowed to a crawl. And as years passed, these ghost towns settled into the land itself, becoming part of the landscape rather than part of daily life. Today, gold rush ghost towns are no longer forgotten. They are visited. Hikers arrive out of curiosity. Historians come with notebooks and old maps. Some people simply wander in by accident, following dirt roads that lead nowhere else. At first, these places feel empty. The wind moves through broken doorways. Floors creak under careful steps. Dust rises with each footfall, settling again as if disturbed for the first time in decades. But then people notice details. A name carved into a wooden beam. A date scratched in a glass. An object left behind in a place too deliberate to be random. Modern visitors sometimes find small things. Old coins hidden beneath floorboards. Gold flakes trapped in cracks near abandoned, say, offices. Glass bottles once used to store gold dust, still buried beneath collapsed walls. Most finds are modest. Nothing like the fortunes people once dreamed of. But their value lies not in wealth. It lies in connection. Each object confirms that real lives passed through these spaces. That people didn't just vanish, they left traces. Some discoveries feel unsettling. Rooms where furniture remains arranged as if someone intended to return the next day. Safes sealed shut, not broken into, simply ignored. Mining shafts that descend into darkness, their purpose unfinished. Visitors often report a strange hesitation, a feeling that they are intruding, that some places are not meant to be disturbed. Because ghost towns are not ruins in the usual sense. They are pauses, moments where time stopped moving forward but never fully moved on. In rare cases, people uncover buried caches near town edges. Small amounts of gold hidden hastily, perhaps meant to be retrieved later. Whether they belong to miners who left or to those who never did is often impossible to know. And so, many visitors leave these places as they found them. They take photographs, they record coordinates, and then they walk away, because removing something feels like crossing a line, as if the town itself is still waiting for an answer no one ever gave. Gold Rush ghost towns matter because they challenge the story we like to tell about success. They are proof that ambition does not guarantee permanence, that opportunity can vanish as quickly as it appears, and that entire communities can rise and fall without ever leaving a proper ending behind. These towns remind us that the gold rush was not just about finding gold. It was about timing, luck, and knowing when to leave. Many people arrived too late. Others stayed too long. Some made the right decision, only to lose everything anyway. Ghost towns are built from those moments, layered one on top of another, until silence becomes the final outcome. They also remind us that history is not always dramatic. Sometimes it fades, not with explosions or final battles, but with empty streets, closed doors, and objects left exactly where they were last used. Life does not always end. Sometimes it simply moves elsewhere. That quiet is what unsettles people today. There is no clear conclusion in a ghost town. No plaque that explains everything. No single reason why it failed. Only fragments. Enough to suggest what happened, but never enough to be certain. And perhaps that is why these places endure. Because they resist explanation. Somewhere in the American West, there are towns where the sun still rises over empty streets, where buildings stand without purpose, where gold once moved from hand to hand and then stopped. These towns were built on belief, on urgency, on the idea that tomorrow would always be better than today. When that belief disappeared, so did everything else. If you're drawn to real treasure stories, lost gold, and the forgotten side of history, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. There are many more stories like this, quiet, unfinished, and waiting to be told. And now, I want to ask you something. If you discovered a ghost town like this, would you search it for what was left behind? Or would you leave it untouched, exactly as it is? Share your thoughts in the comments. Because some places are not empty. They're just waiting for someone to listen.